Baik, acara akan kembali dimulai. Baik, acara selanjutnya yaitu memasuki sesi pertama bersama Ibu Elena Burgos Martinez dengan lecture bertajuk Discussing the Continuity of the Days Socio-Environmental Crisis in Indonesia. Kepada Ibu Elena, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Suara bagaimana? Bagus? Ya. Aku mau bertanya dulu. Oh, musik ya. Lounge. Susah ya. Pakai lagu aja. Terima kasih. Aku mau tanya dulu, apakah ada orang di sini yang tidak mengerti bahasa Indonesia? Is there anyone here who doesn't understand Indonesian? Okay. Maaf ya. It's okay. I prepared a scrambled, like we said earlier, scrambled eggs presentation with English and bahasa Indonesia. But sorry, but I will use English then more. Aku mau bilang juga terima kasih banyak atas mengajak aku ke sini. Ini suatu kehormatan besar. Jadi semoga setiap tahun ada Environmental History School dan bisa datang lagi. Tapi waktu ini dalam selama liburan aku dengan suamiku, jadi aku meminta tolong, aku harus mempersiapkan slides di tablet. Jadi sedikit jelek, tulisan sedikit jelek, minta maaf ya. Baru juga mau minta maaf tentang bahasanya, campur bahasa, jadi maaf. I will speak also in English. And the title of today's presentation, I'm happy that I'm the first one because it's a bit broad and introductory, so I think it makes sense in a way. And I wanted to start with discussing why is it important to think of environmental history when we look at today's crisis and environmental crisis. So I chose two cases, kasus satu kelapa sawit yang paling terkenal di Indonesia. The first case that I chose to discuss today is palm oil crisis, which is one of the most popular cases in Indonesia that everybody discusses here and beyond. And the second case, kasus sampah, waste, which is more related to my research. And the first case, palm oil crisis, is something that I teach in Leiden. Tapi aku mau mulai dengan introduksi kan? Boleh? Slide-nya. Itu aku sedang penelitian. Biasanya bahasa dan di laut selalu. Biasanya kalau aku dosen asisten profesor environmental politics in Leiden, Universitas Leiden. Biasanya aku mengajar kursus seperti itu, ekofeminisme di Asia dan Oceania, ekologi politik juga, ada kursus tentang metode penelitian juga, dengan fokus pada ekofeminisme dan green Islam juga. Baru kalau penelitian aku selalu dengan kepulauan kecil. I always research with small islands, in conversation with small islands, normally in the north of Sulawesi, northeast of Sulawesi, so not in Java. And that explains why my Indonesian is a bit bahasa desa. Biasanya marijo. Todas somos Alpe. But there's many different languages on the island. So I work with islands, very small islands, 5 square kilometers, 5 meter persegi, kilometer persegi. Baru, beberapa bahasa, beberapa agama juga, beberapa budaya juga. Jadi mereka menarik sekali. They're really interesting islands with a lot of languages, a lot of religions on a small island, 5 square kilometers. So it's really interesting to work in conversation with them. And one thing that I learned a lot from these islands is that, sorry, the microphone is really close to my mouth, so the sound is a bit shifty. So what I learned is also that the relationship that we have with nature, with environment, is not straightforward. It's never one type of relationship. On a small island like in the North Sulawesi, there's a number of different relationships with environment. And these relationships come with different languages. I see my colleague Esti from Study Asia Pacific, and she's more senior than I, she's an anthropologist. Can you say hi, Esti? She should be here, I should be there. And she's also an expert in an anthropologist as well, like I am, and an expert on different relationships with the different environments and how they are constructed and what they imply, what kind of powers are promoted in these relationships, what kind of powers are silenced and ignored in these relationships that we build. And so I started my journey through university with geology. I was a geologist, ended up in linguistics, and then ended up in environmental anthropology. So I went through all the faculties, science, social sciences and humanities. And humanities is the faculty that I felt more comfortable with, which is interesting. Why? And one of the reasons why is history, that I could work with history, that I could include history in my research. Anthropologists do a lot of interesting things, but history is not always there. You start in the contemporary world, and then you build a narrative and a perception that might be a bit disconnected from the real meanings of a place. And when you have meanings and practice disconnected, nothing makes sense. You need to look for the meanings that connect to the practices that you're observing or joining. And that's something that I learned through my life on the islands. So this is me doing research, I swear, I'm not on holidays. But my research is usually participant observation, so I have to snorkel, I have to dive, not diving, I don't know how to dive, but I have to be in the water, I have to live on top of the water as well. So I do all these things. And this is around Nain Island, Pulau Nain, que pulau kecil dekat Manado, Pulau Nain, yang paling utara, yang paling jauh. Okay, next slide, ya. Itu kepulauan, itu di dalam Bunaken Taman Nasional, is in the Bunaken National Park, but it's the island further, the farthest one from Manado, which has a particular political connotation, that they can escape a lot of political campaigning. When the sea is rough, when the currents are rough, not a lot of politicians want to arrive. So they say that the ones who arrive are the good ones, or maybe the good ones, the ones that know the sea, and the ones that know the place. And knowing place is important for islanders. And an island is not just an island is the sea also, the sea around it, the other islands. So when they say kami orang pulau, they mean the region. They don't mean just one piece of land. Land and sea are not divided, are not separated in their perception of place. And that's important. Jadi itu di dalam Kabupaten Minahasa Utara, dan Kecamatan Wori, dekat. Di situ di Pulau Nain ada orang Bajo, ada orang Siau, ada orang Sangihe juga, banyak budaya, banyak bahasa, banyak agama. Aku biasanya tinggal dalam Islam, dalam lokasinya Bajo, itu dalam Islam. And this is why I became interested in Green Islam as well. Teachings within Islam that look at relationship with environment. But I'm talking too much about myself. Boleh satu lagi? Itu, Pulau Nain. There's a lot of movement. When I do research, I look at environmental movement, social movement, all in one. There's no separation. So there you can see corals, you can see a lot of different migration patterns from fish. You can see the houses that are built and rebuilt almost every day on different parts of the island. And there's quite a good balance there. There's not a lot of environmental crisis. But, there's always a but, in 2004, a lot of new products from Manado, the capital of North Sulawesi, arrived to the island. Most of the products were bottles of water and chocolate wrapped in plastic, and lots of waru stuff, shampoos, also sachets of shampoo. And so they always say that rumput jalan, so plastic is the rumput, bagaimana rumput kalau bahasa Inggris? The grass, sorry, maaf ya. The grass of the streets, the grass of the cemented streets. So they call it like that. So they all came from Manado. And today we still have these bottles floating and plastic waste. So in 2004, with the tsunami, the Indian Ocean tsunami, sorry if I speak quickly, you can raise your hand if I'm going too fast. With the 2004 tsunami, you see a lot of different things arriving to the islands. One thing is potential waste through all these developmental programs that have this narrative that islanders from the small islands need to develop into stronger communities by drinking bottled water. And also you have all these environmental programs arriving after the tsunami. People need to be prepared to evacuate if there's a tsunami. There's never been a tsunami in the area, so that didn't make any sense. Having these also didn't make any sense, to be honest. But islanders have always been at the center of all of these developmental, environmental programs, which were often disconnected from what was really happening on the island. So the island had problems with flooding, but not with tsunamis. And the island could do with a system to maybe sanitize some water, but it has a very interesting set of wells with very healthy water that I've drank myself as a bullet for 2 years, and I didn't die or anything, so wasn't even sick. So this is the problem with looking at today's crisis, that we don't really know what really happens in places like the islands. And this is the same case when developmental programs arrive from the capitals, and the same with environmental programs. They come with the same narrative. Villagers, islanders are undeveloped, and they need the help of the city, the support of the city, the technologies of the city, the knowledge of the city to become stronger. So there's a complete ignorance there in that narrative, because you don't know how much knowledge there is already on the islands. And that's always been the crisis that you need to look at as well. Can we go forward? Sorry, I'm talking too much. Let me check the time. Okay. Excellent. Waktu perkenalan. Aku pikir cuma ada mahasiswa di sini, jadi aku mempersiapkan banyak aktivitas seperti itu dengan interaksi. Tapi aku mau tanya, sudah tahu semuanya? Sudah terkenal? Sudah kenal dengan semuanya? Tidak? Oke. Jadi aktivitas waktu perkenal, ada banyak barang di situ, banyak konten. Kalau mau bilang tentang latar belakang seperti aku baru bilang, atau mau bilang tentang studi apa yang kalian selama sekarang, atau mau bicara tentang minat lingkungan, interest. What kind of interest do you have? We think environmental crisis. What kind of crisis interests you the most? That's the second last. Or mengapa sejarah? Why history, in your opinion? Because all of you have a lot of different expertises as well, so why is history important to you? So maybe if you already know each other, you can focus on the last 2 points. What kind of interest do you have within environment? And if you don't know each other, you can go through all of them. Is that okay? Yeah, introduce each other. So with the person next to you, and if you already know each other, or probably, you could talk about what kind of crisis are you interested in Indonesia or elsewhere, and why history, in your opinion. Yeah? So I'll give you a few minutes. Go ahead. Just turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself. Yeah? Yeah.
Terima kasih atas kesempatannya spesial ini.
dari pendidikan. Environmental juga pas ya pas naik perahu dia naik perahu dari jalur lama pakai porter apa ini gue harus bikin joper itu yang puncak sejati terus gawain pakai artificial climbing ya porter sih saya kamu tahu jemput di mana kecamatan apa aku sudah mulai berada jemput Kalau nggak suka protes, kita udah satu dari kepenting juga populasi. Jadi aku tidak berani lagi sini bulan. Kalau nggak jurus lagi kalau saya. Dari sekarang pulang berangkat, kantor dulu. Apa jadi pintar peraturan pemerintah tentang
menit lagi, 2 menit lagi.
Berarti hari itu gue jadi lektor.
Oke, maaf ya, who would like to share? Is there anyone who would like to share what they discussed? The microphone.
Cuma aku belum jelaskan metodenya.
If you can say your name also and whatever you want to say.
Yes, selamat pagi semua. Nama saya Rindam, boleh bilang Pak Rindam atau Parin. Saya cuma mau bilang, Mbak tadi cerita mengenai pulau yang di Minahasa, dan orang pulau itu bilang tidak cuma tanah tapi juga laut.
Tidak ada divisi tanah dan laut.
Betul.
Konsepsi apa? Konsepsi rumah, konsepsi pulau
Dalam
beda.
konsep mereka itu jadi satu kan. So I just want to remark that actually for Indonesia as a whole, Indonesians, I cannot say we because I'm not Indonesian, saya orang Belanda. Tapi Indonesian like to say tanah air kita. That means from Aceh to Papua, it's not just a number of pieces of land. Tidak cuma tanah, but tanah air kita, it's our land and sea. So it's one.
Ya betul.
So it's not just for your island, it's for the whole of Indonesia.
Ya betul itu benar. Tapi biasanya kalau di kepulauan kecil, yang lain-lain ada juga di Sulawesi Selatan, ada bukan cuma Sulawesi Utara. Persepsi itu dari dulu, dari sebelum sejarah masa kolonial. Itu konsepsi alam atau konsepsi lingkungan. Tidak ada persepsi seperti yang dalam contoh yang post Aristotle yang separates the mind and the body, the land and the sea, the reason and what is the opposite of reason? And emotion. So I mean, the way that places are constructed, and then in the whole of Indonesia. Yes, but then it depends. When I lived in cities, for example, and in different places, there were different conceptions also of that, which can be also continuous. They can be in continuity with each other. They don't have to be dislocated from each other. So, but yeah, no, there's definitely a perception that this is an archipelago. So Nusantara is also part of the archipelago, and the sea is also, I mean, if you look at history, the sea is paramount for anything that happens in history, so it's always there, and it's always, but there's one thing that I would like to mention, the Bajo, for example, on Nine Islands, have always been taken now, contemporary world, have been constructed as undeveloped and almost primitive, when they have had so much agency in history. They have worked with the Bugis, but the Bugis are always at the top when we talk about maritime history. But they have been the experts, the sea experts, navigator experts. They have helped or not helped the VOC, colonial administrations, the Bugis, the Buginese, and others. And they were so important. There's a book by Gaynor, called Gaynor, with Gaynor, Gaynor, Jennifer Gaynor, isn't it? I think Jennifer. And she's a historian from the States, Columbia, I think she is in. And she wrote a really good book called Intertidal History of Southeast Asia. And this is the first book, Intertidal History of Southeast Asia, in 2016, so quite recent. And this is the first book, history book, that I see in which the Bajo are not portrayed as ignorant victims. You know, their agency is acknowledged, their agency is considered coherently. So, Intertidal History of Southeast Asia, Gaynor, 2016. I reviewed that book for the KITLV journal, and it's one of I was really happy to read it. Finally, I mean, the book talks about also kidnapping, the Buginese kidnapping female Bajo people, and using them to create family alliances to have the navigation expertise that the Bajo had. So they were victims of kidnapping, but they also for their knowledge, for their agency. And women, in Bajo culture, women are paramount. This is why I teach about ecofeminism. I learned a lot about ecofeminism within Islam on 9 islands. And these are islands that are matriarchal in practice, patriarchal on paper. Patriarchal on documents, in administration, in Manado, matriarchal in practice, on daily basis. This is what inspired me to include ecofeminism when I study green Islam or, environmental crisis on islands and maritime settings. But yeah, no, you're right. Sorry, I drifted away to my interest. Sorry to interrupt and say that, but anyone else who would like to share the kind of interest they have in terms of environment and also why history? I'm already saying why history is important, also to acknowledge que Aripan local knowledge and agency from before and now, and to stop constructing people who live in rural spaces or on small islands as victims, undeveloped, this type of ignorant narratives and stuff. So that's one of the reasons why. Who would like to share a bit of what they spoke with each other? Yeah, at the back. Back, yeah. Silakan.
Halo semua.
Halo.
Nama saya Adi dari Palu.
Senang bertemu dengan.
Saya kemarin sempat mengajar jadi guru sejarah. S1 saya di History Education, pendidikan sejarah. Dan saya akhirnya meminati kajian lingkungan justru berdasarkan pengalaman saya saat menjadi penyintas survivor pada peristiwa September 28, 2015 yang reintroduced the meaning of liquefaction to the whole world, dan akhirnya saya hampir semua itu terungkap bahwa satu-satunya sependek penelusuran saya, satu-satunya wilayah yang kurang dari 91 tahun itu mengalami kejadian serupa adalah Kota Palu. 1927 itu tsunami, 38 tsunami, 68 tsunami, 2018 tsunami. Dan saya kira selain berdasarkan pendidikan saya di sarjana, alasan untuk kenapa sejarah ya karena itu tadi saya ingin mengkaji bagaimana sejarah kebencanaan yang selama ini akhirnya muncul kembali minatnya untuk didalami,
Betul.
sehingga saya mengikuti sama sebagainya. Saya kira itu. Terima kasih.
Semangat Pak. So he, for example, as a survivor of tsunami in his region, is interested in the translate a little bit for the audience. Interested in environment. Environment can be very personal also. It's not just something you study, but something that you have experienced. Crisis, like natural disasters, they call them. And the impact they have. It's not just a thing of nature, it's a thing of politics also, and a thing of history as well. The impact they have on communities as well. Thank you for sharing and being here. Who else would like to share? Siapa lagi? Ya, silakan Ibu.
Terima kasih. Perkenalkan nama saya Dieri. Latar belakang saya itu di bidang perikanan dan kelautan. Jadi saya saat ini bekerja di salah satu NGO yang bergerak di bidang konservasi dan juga komunitas masyarakat pesisir. Waktu kuliah saya berkuliah di Fakultas Perikanan Kelautan dan studi programnya itu adalah sosial ekonomi perikanan. Dan kenapa saya di summer school ini? Karena minat lingkungan saya itu dari dulu adalah pengennya social science. Kenapa social science? Karena menurut saya berdasarkan latar belakang saya di dunia perikanan yang banyak berkecimpung di wilayah pesisir, selama ini antara sains khususnya perikanan dengan sosial itu punya gap yang sangat jauh. Jadi khususnya bagi para pengambil keputusan, ketika membuat suatu keputusan itu tidak mempertimbangkan hal-hal yang ada di sosial. Padahal sains itu tuh kaitannya erat dengan sosial, karena ya sains terjadi di sosial, yaitu khususnya di komunitas. Jadi banyak hal-hal yang tidak tersampaikan di bagian komunitas yang paling bawah, khususnya di daerah pesisir. Kemudian mengapa sejarah gitu? Kalau misalkan kembali lagi dengan sejarah Indonesia ya, 70% Indonesia adalah wilayah perairan atau laut, dan mungkin tadi banyak dibahas. Kenapa? Karena saat ini banyak orang melupakan sejarah, padahal khususnya di pengelolaan perikanan, kelautan, atau di wilayah pesisir itu tidak ada yang baru. Jadi semua itu mengacu di hal-hal yang dari sejarah. Jadi tidak ada yang baru. Yang saat ini tuh yang mengembangkan, mengevaluasi dan mengembangkan kembali. Jadi pengetahuan yang ada sekarang itu tuh berawal dari zaman dulu gitu. Karena ya Indonesia kan banyak pulau dan orang-orang pesisir. Kemudian special case-nya saya dari Sulawesi Utara, yang pemuda Sulawesi, spesial di Manado, dan saya senang sekali tadi Mbak sudah merepresentasikan pernah penelitian di Pulau Nang. Jadi saya sangat senang sekali.
Sudah pernah ke pulau lain?
Sudah pernah.
Oh sudah.
Waktu kecil dan sudah lupa sih.
Tidak apa-apa.
Iya. Di Bunaken gitu.
Oh di Bunaken ya. Bunaken kepulauan itu pulau yang paling ada resort. Itu sedikit beda di situ.
Iya,
tapi menarik sekali.
Kalau saya tinggal di kota Manado.
Oh di kota Manado.
Iya benar.
Terima kasih banyak.
Iya terima kasih.
She reflected it's really important to work also with NGOs and community. We can't just discuss at university. You know, you can't just work on environmental history at university. You need to always work with different organizations, different institutions, because universities also have a kind of legacy, right? That is a bit complicated. In the Netherlands here also some, and which is interesting. So we will talk about institutions later also. So I'm happy to see Wally here and a few other NGOs also involved, which is really nice. Siapa lagi? Satu orang lagi yang mau? Ya, siapa? Tiga. Iya, atau? Oke, tiga orang lagi. Tergantung kalau tidak terlalu panjang. Terima kasih.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Umar dari Surabaya, Jawa Timur. Kebetulan memang studi sejarah. Kenapa tertarik pada summer school tahun ini dengan tema lingkungan ini? Karena di tahun 2002 itu sempat ditugaskan atau diresmikan sebagai tim ahli cagar budaya di salah satu kabupaten di Jawa Timur. Tapi sebenarnya saya belum mengakui kalau saya ahli kira-kira semacam itu. Setelah bergerak di dalam pelestarian cagar budaya itu, saya melihat banyak bahwa sebenarnya cagar budaya yang ada itu, sisa peradaban yang ada itu, sisa leluhur kita itu sebenarnya sudah memberikan pesan dan sangat menegaskan bahwa pencapaian pembangunan pada saat itu sama sekali tidak ada yang bertentangan dengan kondisi alam yang ada di Jawa Timur. Entah itu candi, entah itu bentuk petirtaan. Jadi semua pembangunan itu, ya saya memang belum ahli ya untuk menjelaskan bagaimana ekosistem lingkungan itu. Tapi saya rasa itu tidak ada sama sekali pembangunan berupa apapun yang itu bertentangan dengan konsep ekosistem alam di lokal Jawa Timur itu. Mulai dari penataan rumahnya, mulai dari perairannya dan segala macam yang seharusnya oleh orang yang sok modern itu dianggap primitif, padahal itu adalah peradaban tingkat tinggi. Kalau kita mengkaji situs itu tidak hanya itu harus dilestarikan, itu cagar budaya atau bukan, tapi lebih kepada bagaimana teknologi pada saat itu dikembangkan dan sama sekali tidak bertentangan dengan kondisi alam yang ada, kira-kira semacam itu. Makanya kenapa kemudian tertarik dengan topik yang diselenggarakan pada kesempatan ini. Terima kasih.
Betul, benar sekali ya. Terima kasih banyak. Isi ya, we can all clap for an applause for all people. And you can't separate the social. She also said it earlier. You can't separate social issues from environmental issues. They all come together. You can't, depending on the type of technology that you bring to a place, you need to be coherent with the the situation in the place, que arifa local wisdom, whether that technology makes sense or not. Also considering the social circumstances of people, housing, health, many different things. You can't separate health from environment either. And this is why I'm happy also in the humanities you can include many different things, in the social sciences also. And if you look at environment only if you have a biocentric approach or a social approach that ignores environment or relationship with environment, then you're missing a bit. It can be interesting, but you're missing the whole story in a way. Oke, satu lagi yang terakhir, boleh Ibu? Maaf ya Pak, nanti bisa berbicara sementara makan siang.
Halo, selamat siang. Terima kasih. Perkenalkan saya Ayu Maulitri dari Get Plastik Indonesia. Sebelumnya latar belakang saya adalah ilmu politik, kemudian berminat di ekofeminism untuk skripsi saya sendiri. Lalu saya juga bekerja di plastic waste management, yang mana itu ya, hampir mirip. Ya, I
Mau
would
di sini, mau ikut? She has a very similar approach.
experience ya. Kenapa sejarah? Saya ingin lihat bagaimana trajektori ekofeminisme di Indonesia itu tidak hanya dipandang dari sisi ekofeminisme ini datang dari barat gitu. Jadi saya melihat bahwa ternyata di Indonesia sendiri gerakan-gerakan perempuan yang berbasis lingkungan itu ternyata sudah ada sebelum term ekofeminisme itu muncul. Jadi saya mau melihat bagaimana sejarah itu dapat meng-capture itu, dan saya juga mau mendekonstruksi bagaimana esensialisme dari perempuan dan lingkungan untuk tidak terjebak dalam posisi yang dilemahkan seperti itu. Jadi mungkin nanti Ibu bisa cerita.
Kasih saya, aku dengan senang hati ya, dengan senang hati. She's, sudah selesai sebelum?
Sudah.
Oh ya. She's 100%. She's saying that ecofeminism is nothing new. Ecofeminism existed before the word ecofeminism became a fashion in academia, but also in NGOs and beyond. Ecofeminism is also not something that came from the West. It precedes colonial history also, and it's something that I discovered through all my research also. I was very surprised, which tells you about my own neo-colonial bias, to find on an island that women were running the place, and women were taking care of the environmental issues, and also there were people with no gender on the island. And this is part of the ancestral knowledge of the island. Not having gender, shifting gender, becoming neutral when you grow in a status which doesn't have to do with age also. Or being a female that is at the head of environmental issues. So I started researching a bit that, where does that come from? Is it something new, is it something old? And then I realized there was part of local wisdom from well beyond my time and our times. And yes.
Yeah, I was also working for the coastal areas assistance, and I see that a lot of females is burdened by the working of the plastic waste management itself. So I would like to know more about that, maybe from your perspective.
That's something that happens a lot also within the palm oil crisis, in all those cases that I wanted to discuss later after a little toilet break that I will give you, but also within mining. Some people might be interested in mining as an environmental crisis of its own. When industries come, industries like mining, industries like fishing, like industrial fishing, not local fishing or like fishing for survival, also subsistence, but industrial fishing, mass fishing, and also industries like the waste industry. Waste is also an industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry across the world. We will talk about that later. When these industries come, they have a particular construction of the environment. They construct the environment as an object, or not as a subject that joins your discussion, but as an object to be used as a resource. They give environment the stamp, resource curse here. And that comes with a particular construction of people also. The people who live in these areas, they are a resource, stamped as a resource, or as a dump where you bring your waste. Are constructed in a particular way. They are objects also. And within that, women are also constructed in a particular way. All of these industries are patriarchal. All of these industries are patriarchal, man-oriented, masculine in some ways. We will talk about that later. And they bring this very patriarchal binary construction of people. to those places who are stamped as a resource. So environmental crisis is a crisis of gender also, identity is a crisis of social identity, is a crisis of agency, is a crisis of everything. And the reverse can also be said. Gender crisis is an environmental crisis. When some industries and some developmental programs arrive to Nine Island, they send some of the women to the kitchen, basically. This is for men, from Manado, from Jakarta, but also from international NGOs. They wanted to talk to the men who led the island. So what happens when you move women who are experts on a particular resource, I'm using the word even myself, see the bias, who are experts in a particular matter to do with the environment, when you move them back to the kitchen, what happens? Or when you move them somewhere else, you are severe and you are killing the environment also, because that knowledge is removed and that connection is removed. So you can't separate, I didn't plan to talk so much about this, but you can't separate gender constructions and discrimination from environmental, that's my new research by the way, from environmental crisis. So, but we should definitely talk and yeah, Nanti, yeah? Mafia. Okay, does anyone need a toilet break? Or not? Would you like a toilet break? No? We continue? Yeah? Okay, if anyone wants a toilet break, go ahead. Or you can raise your hand and we can do so. Next, can I? So, caso Jean Palin Terkenal, ¿qué le ha pasado with? Palm oil crisis. There's a book, I never promote my work, I don't promote other people's works, because I think it makes more sense. I just went to his Facebook, let me find it. There's a book that had just been published, that some of you might know, some of you might not know, by our colleague from UvA, Universitas van Amsterdam, but also KITLB, Bart Scott, sorry for the pronouncing the name. And the book is called Kehampaan Hak. Do you know about the book? Have you seen it already? Kehampaan Hak, Masyarakat versus Perusahaan Sawit di Indonesia. So that's an interesting book. It's just been published in Bahasa Indonesia, and it covers 150 cases, I think, of palm oil conflicts. The author is my colleague, our colleague, Bart. Sorry, it's difficult for me to speak Dutch a bit. Bart Scott, and he's a political anthropologist, also a political scientist, and he's now here, I think, somewhere across Java, right? Where is he now?
Book tour.
In a book tour. So the book is interesting. The book has 150 cases of crisis. I'll leave his Facebook now. Can I go to the next slide? And so I used to teach with him some courses on environmental politics that we make together in Leiden. And we always assign this resource, this report by the Gecko project. Have you read it? Nobody read it. What? Heartbroken. So this was one of the free readings that I assigned for today's talk, but it's okay, we can read it together. Take some time to read this. Boleh baca ini? This is the conclusion of the Gecko project report. Can you read it well? Yeah. Depressing. Sudah membaca? Sedikit sedih, sangat sedih. Kan? Sudah? Yeah? Yeah. Terima kasih. So this is the conclusion of the Geckos project report many years ago, before us. And they investigated why are farmers struggling so much against palm oil companies. What are the underlying causes? How do you feel when you read this? Frustrated, no? A bit frustrated. Merasa bagaimana? Setelah membaca ini, merasa ya, tidak baru itu ya. Tapi, we will talk about it later. So this is interesting. So it's nothing new, isn't it? The next is the link between politics and business gets on the way of everything. Next slide, please. So I wanted to ask, why, in your own words, why is it so difficult for farmers to fight against land grabbing? So land grabbing, essentially, you know what it means, taking your land that has belonged to you and your families for generations, ancestry. A company comes, takes it, and plants whatever they want. It can be palm oil, it can be oil palm, it can be something else. It doesn't have to just be mining also. Mining can also be analyzed and discussed under the same critique and principles. So why is it so difficult for farmers? Because you do have the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, right? Mediating some of these problems, some of these crises. You have you have changes. There are changes happening. The government is revoking licenses, right? As we speak, which helps in a way, but not entirely. So before we talk about this, I wanted you to think why. What are the key issues that get on the way of farmers resisting land grabbing and getting properly represented in parliament, you know, and advancing with these protests? What is getting on the way still today? Think about it. And tell the person next to you. This is the last one that we have to interact, but tell the person next to you, why do you think, the question that we have on the slide, mengapa begitu sulit sekali bagi petani untuk menolak perampasan tanah, land grabbing? Why is it so difficult still today? With all the roundtable of palm oil mediating, with all the revoking licenses that the government, Djokovic's government has done, why is it still difficult? Some people say it's getting better, maybe. But why is it still difficult? Why do we still have the classics? Tell each other, the person next to you, why do you think is the key element that is still getting on the way? You can think of mining as well, mining or anything else. Maaf ya. Aku suka proses ini ya. Suara menjadi kecil. Terima kasih banyak. Maaf ya. Terima kasih banyak. Okay, who would like to share? Ya, Bapak di belakang.
Oke,
Bapak maaf ya, tidak tahu namanya.
ya aja.
Senang bertemu.
Terima kasih, Mbak Elena.
Maybe I will tell my experience based on my childhood life in East Kalimantan, Balikpapan.
Oh ya.
Jadi ya mungkin ini hipotesa saya yang mungkin masih sangat prematur. Jadi mengapa petani itu susah untuk mempertahankan lahan mereka di perampasan is based on tahun 1965. Jadi pasca Barisan Tani Indonesia is disbanded, dibubarkan, dan seluruh anasir-anasir kelompok kiri sudah kehilangan panggung politik di Indonesia, maka petani kesulitan untuk memantapkan posisi mereka dalam bidang konteks sosial dan politik. Dan ini berakibat mereka tidak memiliki konsolidasi yang cukup efektif untuk melawan masuknya gempuran modal dari luar. Tapi ada beberapa perbedaan yang saya lihat antara beside the outer island, Jawa dan luar Jawa. Example in Kalimantan, jadi di Kalimantan Timur, orang Jawa thinks Kalimantan is an uninhabited island, jadi pulau yang tidak punya penghuni. Jadi mereka memandang Kalimantan itu merupakan dompet nasional, kata Eropa Darusman. Jadi base economic growth in early 70s. Jadi tahun 1970-an Indonesia mengekstraksi hampir seluruh basis sumber daya alam di Kalimantan, termasuk forestry, hutan, dan mereka menganggap itu merupakan hal yang wajar. Dan sekali lagi ya tidak bisa melawan karena di sana kebanyakan merupakan etnik Dayak yang mungkin near literasi, tidak bisa memiliki jangan-jangan advokasi untuk memberikan keberatan. Tetapi kalau di Jawa basisnya sekali lagi mereka tidak memiliki sarana untuk kemudian memberikan sebuah akses penolakan. Dan ini juga mungkin terjadi karena paradigma pembangunan kita in suatu era patriark, jadi selalu patriarki, dan memandang bahwa orang yang memiliki different opinions about growth ekonomi, pembangunan yang berkelanjutan itu dianggap miskin. Ini banyak terjadi di Kalimantan Timur ketika kita melihat kebutuhan local wisdom yang kamu hanya mengambil secukupnya dari alam, kamu harus berterima kasih to the mother nature, dan ini diganti dengan paradigma pembangunan yang mengejar gross domestic product. Jadi sebanyak mungkin kamu harus mengkapitalisasi aset hutan menjadi uang. Ya akhirnya kita menganggap bahwa orang-orang yang hidupnya sederhana itu sebagai sebuah problem for this growth economic in Indonesia. Jadi sebuah problem ekonomi di Indonesia, dan mereka dipaksa ya, kemudian untuk mengikuti cara-cara orang Jakarta dalam mengeksploitasi alam. Nah ini kemudian menjadi problem. Dan kalau di Jawa hal yang sama, yang ketika saya melakukan sebuah riset kecil di Meru-Betiri National Park, jadi udah ada penduduk di situ sejak masa kolonial. Tiba-tiba pemerintah Indonesia mengeluarkan surat keputusan bahwa wilayah mereka tempati selama bulan menjadi taman nasional. Ya, mereka juga sudah kesulitan karena secara struktur ekonomi dan politik mereka tidak sekuat ketika ada BTI, Barisan Tani Indonesia, yang mereka punya kemampuan untuk menyuarakan isu ini di level nasional dan internasional. So, ya, akhirnya.
Benar sekali ya.
Okay, thank you.
Spot on. So, namanya Pak? Sudah bilang kan?
Ryan.
Ya, maaf ya, tidak bisa mendengarkan kanan Ryan.
Oke.
Tidak apa-apa. Terima kasih banyak. No, itu 100% lagi. And so, like we said earlier, and then somebody can talk. Like as you mentioned and as we discussed earlier, this construction of local communities as undeveloped, premature, infantilized, these paternalistic constructions of islanders, but also people in the highlands and different rural peoples and communities, are not just a narrative that, okay, they bothers me a bit, I'm more than this. They serve a purpose, a political purpose. They help institutions, they help businesses, they help industries grab the land, essentially. And that narrative of the uncivilized and wanting to bring progress and technology is not new. It's a colonial narrative, also across the world, not just in Indonesia, right? So this is how the VOC, for example, in the case of Indonesia, but you can also look at Spanish colonial history as well, and they did similar things in Britain and other countries. So they justify their projects. They were essentially economic, so that these were projects to foster better economies in the metropolis. They always use this narrative of the uncivilized. They always use this narrative of bringing civilization, right? When what they wanted is to grab the resources, to make countries and places become resources. And then Indonesia inherited that from colonial history. And today, the Indonesia that is one is divided. Some areas are categorized as resources, and there comes companies to take them. And then people's agencies are severed and ignored completely because of these narratives. Narratives, languages, words are really powerful. They carry so much power, even when they are not on paper. Unacknowledged, unconscious narratives and biases, neo-colonial biases and colonial biases, can legitimize land grabbing. Really bad. So that's one of the main, and this hasn't been discussed much in research about palm oil or mining and land grabbing, how this narrative promotes cap agency and promote these constructions that help companies come. So that's a big part of it. So one of the two key words of today for me are continuity, historical continuity, and inheritance. What kind of narratives have we inherited today in Indonesia, and in other places in the world? And what kind of power imbalances do they promote and perpetuate? And who do they serve, these narratives, these constructions of people and their places? So it's essential. Language, paradigms like that is essential to discuss as well. What else? Other things, yeah. Dari dulu masih. Apa lagi? Ada apa?
Terima kasih. Nama saya Gilang Madika, and I was graduate student of anthropology di universitas ini, tapi now I'm no longer a student since I just graduated in January in this year. It's really interesting because the question is really hard for me to answer. Jadi itu pertanyaannya sederhana, tapi saya benar-benar gak punya jawaban yang tepat gitu. Tapi saya punya pengalaman gitu, living with the local community. They are Dayak Benua community living in East Kalimantan, and I carry out research for 6 months with these local people, and Dayak Benua community, I think they have a long history living with one of the transnational company, and the company names ini namanya London Sumatra Corporation. So it is a big company since 1997. Dan my informant used to be a head of village di Muara Nayan. Dia bilang, kita marah gitu. They were furious because the company taking over their lands gitu loh. Mereka marah terus. Akhirnya tahun 1999. Tapi sebelumnya mereka sudah sering demonstrasi. They used to make a demonstrations terus against the corporations, dan biasanya kadang mereka juga bakar-bakar bara. Bara itu is a camp, a place for oil palm workers under ini ya perusahaannya. Terus akhirnya di tahun 1999 itu mereka akhirnya held customary rituals. Namanya mereka sebut belian gubuk. Itu gubuk itu jadi sebenarnya itu ritual penyembuhan gitu, healing rituals, tapi akhirnya itu dipakai untuk resolve the conflict, land dispute between the local community and the company. Tapi itu juga nanti ada pemerintah yang datang di tengah-tengah di situ juga untuk resolve the conflict tahun 1999. And then they put up blontak. Blontak itu semacam totem gitu, as a sign of peace gitu among Dayak Benua dan company. Tapi yang saya justru tertarik itu justru dengan adanya simbol perdamaian ini yang dibangun totem besar itu saya foto. Tetap akhirnya mereka tetap dirampas gitu lahannya, meskipun sudah ada bentuk perdamaian gitu, tapi tetap the company is still running until this day gitu. Terus itu juga akhirnya, tapi di tahun 1997-98 itu Indonesia mungkin dalam perspektif sejarah ya, itu kan sudah mulai ada semacam wacana-wacana desentralisasi gitu. So I think one of the reasons why they are really hard to to take a resist untuk ini, itu mungkin karena they are hardly getting recognized gitu. Susah diakui gitu kalau menurutku, susah diakui sama pemerintah, terutama di bawah rezim Orde Baru yang so centralized, jadi nggak bisa orang punya autonomy to give a speech gitu ke pemerintah. Tapi mungkin di waktu desentralisasi mereka sudah mulai ada suara-suara kecil untuk orang-orang Dayak ini diberdayakan sama pemerintah, meskipun itu juga terlampau lama, butuh waktu 2000 tahun baru. Dan oil palm is really new commodity for Dayak Benua. Itu tahun 2011 mereka baru menanam tahun ini, jadi itu sangat-sangat butuh waktu yang.
I think the European Union, the European Union started promoting palm oil as an alternative to more non-biofuels in 2009, isn't it?
Yeah.
It started from the European Union promoting this type of oil, this type of product.
Yeah.
And then it came to Indonesia in 2011, right?
Yeah,
Quite
right.
recently, yeah. So it's interesting also the global connections in a way, how oil started, and now banned by the European Union also. So it comes back to those who promoted the kind of industry, who then banned it after, when they saw the effects of the industry. They also promoted soy. The European Union also promoted soy. Soy is even more damaging than palm oil. So at least soy didn't come as much, but so that's the case. So essentially we go back to the same. History has served institutions, has formed institutions. Colonial history has formed institutions. They are alien to today's people still. They have been inherited today. And these institutions are the government, centralized, decentralized. Also, I think I disagree a bit. I agree with everything you said, but I disagree in the thing you said that decentralization of power helps. I think it gets on the way as well, because then you get all these district heads who have to represent communities, and they're working with big businesses and corporations. So decentralization of power is good, I'm not saying it's bad, but it backfired in Indonesia. If we look at the palm oil crisis. In other aspects, maybe we can look at particular cases, not everywhere, but in most of the locations, all these local powers promoted their own interest, and through their own families they created, we're going to look at an example in a second. Shall we go further? Sorry to interrupt you. I like learning from you, so this is why I keep asking. So one of the institutions also beyond the government, or as part of the government, one of the institutions that Indonesia inherited from colonial history is law, a particular kind of law, right? So in 1875, the Dutch colonial administration claimed that all the forests in Indonesia belong to the state. 1875, up until today, that law hasn't changed. It's still active today. So Indonesian forest has 70% of the country, isn't it? 70% around that? So if the state owns all the forest, the state owns almost the whole Indonesia, right? I mean, if we speak of land, if you look at the sea, they also own it, but it's a different thing in a way. So after independence, this law continued, and then during the Suharto era, he also continued with this law and promoted rural development in the sense of resources. Again, the resource curse. The country became a resource for the state, the institution called the state, the nation state, later. And Suharto continued constructing, so it doesn't stop with Suharto, of course. There's some people who are critical from Suharto on, and some people who stop at Suharto. So you need to continue. There's continuity, there has to be a critique that continues through all the periods. And Suharto promoted this idea of rural development, all the resources that Indonesia has for business, essentially. So, and still today, we have the same. That law continues today. Why? So, next slide. That law gets on the way of recognizing local traditions, local wisdom, and legal pluralism. Because Indonesia doesn't just have a state law, that's it. It has a lot of ancestral law as well, right? Ancestral laws, they construct or conceptualize the ownership of land as a community, communal ownership of land, right? But communal ownership of land, which precedes colonization, is not on paper. There's no documents you can show the government, right? We community own this land. This doesn't exist. So the government wins because it has the documents. We have this law from 1875. We own the land. And then they can grant 30-year-long licenses to companies, international companies, national companies. There has been advance. Not everything is negative. You know these things already. So sorry to repeat, but among the NGO, Indonesian NGO, in 2012 made it to parliament with their demands, representing local struggles. And then the Constitutional Court urged the state to revoke licenses. So that's success. There is success. But then that success backfired again, because then the state said in 2012, okay, so we will recognize indigenous ownership, but we decide who is indigenous. And so they started saying, to be indigenous, you need to wear certain clothes, you need to dance, you need to... And then communities started performing that. Many communities started overly performing whatever they thought the state wanted. The indigenous, co-opted by the state, they decide. So the state decided in Bantu, for example, they gave them the status of indigenous. On the islands, they didn't, because they looked too contemporary. So indigeneity, it's not only ignored, but it's co-opted by the state. So who owns the environment? Still, today. So that's it. This is why history is really important as well, in the way that it has played with indigeneity and identity and local wisdom and local ownership of land. Can we go to the next? So this is one of the examples that I wanted to share with you in which decentralization of power hasn't worked. Democracy hasn't worked either, because democracy has taken a shape in which, also in other countries, not just in Indonesia, but a shape in which the elites, the colonization created, so colonization also created elites, right? Business elites. They were sort of allies of the colonial administration. These business elites are still intertwined with politics. You cannot separate them. So you have a politician like Darwan Ali, who is also a businessman, and he's a head of district. So he became a head of district after decentralization of power, and of Serayan. Serayan is in Kalimantan. You know this case probably better than I. And I'm going to show you how it works. Next slide. That's how it works, basically. So Darwan Ali creates, invents a few companies, and gives it to family members. So here you can see him, a caricature or something like that. Then you can see the companies he created and to whom he gave it. You can look at it for a second. You can read it. And then the family companies are sold to the big palm oil corporations and groups. So have a look at it. Some of these corporations we don't know the names of, unfortunately. Some of them come from China, some of them come from Europe, some of them come from Australia, some of them come from around here. So some of the companies from Australia have now been sold to Indonesians in Kalimantan, I just heard a few weeks ago. Some of the Australian palm oil companies have been sold to Indonesians now in Kalimantan. So essentially, politics facilitates business, helped by law, helped by inheritances of history. Next. And these are the elites that I mentioned earlier. Behind all of this, there's big corporation groups, which are always invisible. So I think we need to center, in the history of palm oil press, we need to center people like the Wilmar Group, for example. And 6 of Darwan Ali's companies were bought by Robert Kuok of the Wilmar Group. And the Wilmar Group not only owns palm oil companies, but also owns the South China Morning Post. How many of you enjoy reading the South China Morning Post? I do, right? Well, he owns it also. So I want you to think of environmental crisis as perpetuated by a family of companies that will not only be environmental related. So you have food industry, you have luxury and middle market hotels, you have real estate, you have media, all within one lovely family of corporation. So these sister companies are always together. So it's not just palm oil. It's not just palm oil. And I think he's worth $11.3 billion, which is great to know, in a way. And he's Chinese Malaysian. So one of these elites created the form during colonization and still are maintained today in business. Can we go forward? Yes. So I mentioned this already. So the backlash of the palm oil industry started in Europe as they tried to boost the market, but then realized the effects where the impact was really negative, and then they banned it. That is also not easy for Indonesia or Malaysia or other places, because you create this industry in which very small cases are successful, and then you remove it after, and people are left with nothing. Their land has been grabbed, now it belongs to the state. What is happening after? So there was criticism in Indonesia and Malaysia saying that the European Union only follows their industries and what they think is convenient for their economy, and disregards places like Indonesia and Malaysia because they are pure resources, and that's it. They don't care. So institutions, again, like the European Union, are part of this as well. And we can go ahead. Okay, so the second case. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about waste, and then at the end, I'm going to, very briefly, and then I'm going to ask you, why is history important in these two cases? Yeah? So we said already, because it kind of, we need to look at history in a way that it centers the histories of local people, local communities, in their own rights, promoting and discussing their agency. Yeah? Yeah? And, but also because we need to look at the crisis of today in a continuity of different periods and the type of institutions and elites they have produced. Okay? Yeah? Following somehow? So with the waste case, it's a bit different. It touches upon the maritime, itu di lokasi maritim, lebih banyak. Next slide. So, sorry for those who are Dutch. I'm also a Dutch resident now. So, you know the Plastic Foundation? Do you know the Plastic Foundation? Tahu Plastic Foundation? Di Amsterdam? Itu LSM NGO in Amsterdam. So the Plastic Foundation, you can click on the link. Later you can send the PowerPoint and then you can click on the link. So the Plastic Foundation has done research consulting 200 countries in the world, and the Netherlands won the first place of exporting waste to Indonesia, across the world, and to Indonesia. So I was really hurt in my heart. I thought, like, wait, 200 countries and they win the first, what? I thought it was Germany, but yeah. So Germany is number 2 now. So essentially, we don't know yet, because after this report came out, 2021, GroenLinks brought this report to the parliament and said, why is the government allowing or sending 200 million kilos of waste, 7 million kilos to Indonesia and 64 million to Vietnam of unrecyclable plastic, mixed plastics? Why? And the parliament, I read the response, the parliament responded, of course we don't want children in, I don't know why children in Indonesia to have waste on the doorstep, but we had no idea this was happening. Okay, that sounds a bit like, how would the government miss that? 200 million, how can you miss that? And I doubt it. So I think there's again a nexus in between business, because it moves billions. The plastic industry moves billions of dollars across countries. China is involved also, and other countries, but it's business, it's economy again. So there's a certain nexus there as well. So being in Indonesia for 3 months already this time, I asked around, does Jokowi know? To some colleagues who work in UI and some people I know in the government, does Jokowi know that waste is being brought to Indonesia? And they said, we don't know, we think it's being done through private companies also. The private companies are coming and dealing with businesses here directly. I also doubt that the government can miss 200 tons coming into the country. So again, the nexus between business and politics. And why is Indonesia and Vietnam and other locations a dumping ground as well? Same curse as a resource curse, now a dumping ground also for plastics. So some of these plastics are dumped in close to the sea, and they float away, and they arrive to Pulau Nain, for example, or to other places. You see them in the Bunaken archipelago. Some of the plastics are from domestic tourism or international tourism. It's not all from here. Some of the plastics are from consumption, unwanted plastic bottles on Nine Island. Some of the plastics come from this also. So we need to acknowledge that there's a long-lasting relationship between countries that favors certain economies than others and favors certain places. And this is inherited. from colonization? Why would you send it to Indonesia and not to Italy? Italy has a good recycling plant, and Italy has the technology, for example, it's in the south of Europe, and it has the technology to process this, but it's more expensive than sending it here. So that's one of the things. Next slide. To feel a bit better about it, Germany also does it. Not to feel better at all, but so Germany, this is an article by The Guardian where Greenpeace, the NGO Greenpeace, researched, went to Turkey and looked at different rubbish, Marks and Spencer's, for example, and called the companies with activists from Turkey and called the companies and asked them, why is your wrapping here in Turkey? So they did research, with GIS, they mapped the trash, all these plastic containers, and then they realized that Germany was sending, 1 year, and then the trend is going up. The trend is always going up, it's not ending or anything. It's sending hundreds of tons, again, of mixed plastic you cannot recycle, has been sending that to Turkey for years and years. And in 2021, Turkey banned it. They said, enough. We don't have the capacity here to deal with this. And then they went to Vietnam. So many Turkish activists, environmental activists, also from Vietnam, and together with Greenpeace and others, did this research and then protested. And the German government says, we have no idea. How can you prove this is ours? Marks and Spencer's. So again, evading accountability for the sake of business. And of course, this type of plastic, when it arrives, either accumulates, floats, or is burned. And when you burn plastic, it releases gases, toxic gases to the atmosphere. So it's not good either. And it's not, for example, that we European countries are sending waste to Southeast Asia and then helping with technology, so people can process it and then get some money out of it. Nothing like that. There's no support. There's no, So it's just dumping waste essentially. So you can see. So in an example from Germany, from this study in Germany, you can see the journey of waste from Germany to Vietnam. What do you think that? How do you think that pollutes? A lot. It's not just the waste; it's the journey. A vessel full of plastic going all the way through the seas, stopping in different countries, being broken, spilling oil because it's broken every now and then, having to dock here, having to dock there. Countries in Saudi Arabia saying you cannot dock here because you're polluting, and they have to continue and they end up docking in Sri Lanka. So there's a certain imbalance in the way that countries cannot choose to say no to certain relationships and certain power imbalances. So that's still there. And the journey itself pollutes a lot, and then the waste also pollutes a lot. Let me check if this is, we're finishing soon, don't worry. Okay, wait, yes. Okay, next slide please. So, how does history help? Bagaimana secara membantu memahami kedua krisis ini dengan lebih adil? So how can history help approach these two case studies from a more fair perspective? How can history play a role in helping approach this crisis in a more fair, coherent way? Think about it for 1 minute. And then I'm going to ask somebody, you don't need to talk to each other anymore. I'm going to ask somebody to give me one answer, and then we can go through. Maaf ya, lebih terlambat. How can history help? Does anyone have an answer already? A quick answer, it doesn't have to be...
Starts with the big letter C.
C. I think I know that. You want to go ahead?
History of capitalism.
Yes, definitely. History of business, capitalism, industries, also connected to how capitalism was boosted and started with colonization. Definitely. We're stuck in a very utilitarian, patriarchal, racist systems, essentially. And we can do a lot about it, of course. But we need to look at systems, shadow systems, like the ones that the Gecko Project discusses, systems in the back that you can't see. And we need to look at it from the perspective of local communities, also centering them in history and their agencies. One more? Yeah. We discussed this already. So there's some people like Fukuyama who discuss an approach that might be interesting for some of you, historical institutionalist approach to look at environmental crisis, in which you look at the type of institutions that history has created, institutions like law, nation states, industries, these type of institutions, and the impact they have on the environment, how they construct the environment as an object, as a resource, how they change the relationship of humans with the environment by making it an object, that you consume or that you have to extractive approaches to environment and human-environment relations. And these institutions are always alien to people, to us even. They're always outside, they're always alien, they're always strange, we can't access political society as much. So why? And there's a continuity to those institutions in a way that, in the case of Indonesia, for example, when colonial rulers left after independence, the kind of formal institutions they had developed were not strong enough yet. They were still weak. And so all the informal ones, the nexus between business and government, continued taking over environments, etc. So you can't look at environmental crisis without looking at a history of institutions in continuity, and without looking at politics, institutions like capitalism also, by the way. Without looking at politics, without looking at society, so it's all contained, it's all the same. It's all connected, not the same, it's all connected. Next slide. And these are a few reasons in Bahasa Indonesia of why it is important to look at environment and environmental crisis from a humanities perspective, including history, language, as we said, narratives and words and language. Keadilan sosial lingkungan, fairness in between society and environment. Pendekatan antar species, also looking beyond human-centric approaches. I haven't discussed that much today, but looking at different perspectives involving fish, for example, as subject, not as object of your research. In conversation with fish. This is something I learned on Nine Island, that you can't look at environment and fish only as food. The fish have agency, and they decide if you can fish them or not. So, because they are in contact with ancestors. So also to move beyond a biocentric perspective to a more coherent local perspective, and to escape essentialist and neo-colonial constructions and approaches to people and places, and to approach environmental crisis from a multidisciplinary interdiscipline perspective, not just history but also language. Language is history, history is language, culture the same. And to center, the last point basically says to center grassroots initiatives, to work with grassroots initiatives, NGOs, people who really know what is happening on the ground. We tend to be disconnected. I tend to be disconnected from what is happening in the ground. I think it's important that we all recognize that. In academia, we tend to be a bit disconnected from what is happening on the ground. So we need to wake up calls constantly. And the last slide, kalau ada yang tertarik, bisa mengirimkan email. This is my email, enlightened, and you can always ask me questions now or later. Apakah ada pertanyaan? Bisa juga atau sementara makasih ya. Dan terima kasih banyak semua. Terima kasih. Pertanyaan tidak? Cukup.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Elena atas pemaparan materi yang sangat menarik. Mungkin dari teman-teman audiens ada yang ingin menanyakan.
Terima kasih balik.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Can I sit?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
You can come here also. Anything you want.
Thank you. Saya sangat tertarik ya tentang materinya, terutama berkaitan dengan misalnya kenapa sih sebenarnya sejarah itu sangat, it's very intertwined with everything basically, especially environmental history. But yang saya ingin tanyakan gitu ya, sebenarnya we use a lot of a term for communities. I mean, the local knowledge and communities as local wisdom, you know. But in my perspective, so my background is in law. I studied legal studies and I'm interested in the social legal. But then I see that I mostly work with the advocacy with the government. I also work with the NGO. I work in the advocacy in the government. But then the problem with the local wisdom term, itu menjadi tokenism. It become a token. Karena pada prinsipnya akhirnya kearifan lokal, pengetahuan mereka atas misalnya ikan tertentu boleh dimakan atau tidak, ikan tertentu boleh diambil atau tidak, itu pun nggak menjadi suatu hal yang penting bagi mereka karena itu bukan pengetahuan akademis. Karena in my experience saat advokasi dengan pemerintah misalnya, saat mau mengundang partisipasi masyarakat, yang mereka undang itu siapa? Universitas. Yang mereka undang itu ya akademisi misalnya atau NGO bahkan yang diundang. Alih-alih masyarakat yang memang punya pengetahuan itu. So basically I just wanted to know that how is this? Apakah sejarah hanya melihat sesuatu sebagai kayak sesuatu yang statis, stagnan dan oke, ada local wisdom dan kita bisa menggunakannya untuk keberlanjutan, atau itu sesuatu yang sebenarnya kayak itu selalu bertumbuh gitu and it's ever growing.
Setuju 100% lagi. And she's 100% right. So essentially, I'll explain a bit in English. So essentially, why is it always that everything we discuss about environmental crisis has to be mediated by institutions, like the university also, that when you work with local knowledge, there always has to be an academic that mediates, like myself, for example, or many of us, they mediate that local knowledge. Local knowledge co-opted by research, co-opted by institutions like the university, co-opted always in collaboration with government, right? Because if you, they've asked me to become a visiting fellow at Berlin. So research is also part of governance, and governance has to be brought into research as well. But then how can I put it? How to go beyond these institutions when we are part of these institutions as much? And again, many words like local wisdom, sustainability are co-opted. Also for tourism, pariwisata as well, and exploited. So what does local knowledge even mean? Local wisdom, what does it even mean? So we need to have this reflective critique constantly in front of us when we work. We always have to ask ourselves, who am I working with? Who am I helping with this narrative and these languages? Because I'm not giving my presentation in Baon Sama, am I? And I learned Baon Sama while I was on the island. I use Bahasa Indonesia. That also has a connotation, a particular connotation on the islands. The narratives of Bahasa Indonesia are different from the narratives of Baon Sama. So also in terms of languages, what powers do we represent with languages? And 100%. Always make me a bit sad, but also make me happy to know that we all share these reflections, that we are keeping sharp in a way, that we're not assuming, taking things for granted. 100% ya, penting sekali ya. Terima kasih. Siapa lagi? Ada? Tidak? Ada yang mau makan siang? Yes. Ada satu lagi, cuma satu Pak, mau bertanya di belakang dia. Aku mau minta maaf juga tidak bisa ikut stasi yang lain itu karena suamiku menunggu dan ada acara-acara liburan. Tapi nanti aku menonton video kalau ada. Maaf ya semua. Ya silakan.
Oke, terima kasih Ellen. Saya Jaka dari Monggabai dan saya sempat ikut salah satu Eco Project kemarin dan memang banyak masalah yang sebenarnya di balik itu banyak sekali masalahnya. Tapi saya kurang menangkap jawaban soal bagaimana sejarah menjawab ketidakadilan lingkungan itu, dan saya penasaran karena Ellen mau segera pergi setelah makan siang ya. Nanti takut tidak terkejar. Saya mau bertanya bagaimana kemudian setelah Anda meneliti di Pulau Nain, dan saya juga kebetulan kemarin sedang mendalami di Mentawai dan juga beberapa pulau kecil. Sebenarnya gimana sih setelah Anda meneliti itu dampak dari, kan kita tahu ada keterputusan pemahaman sejarah dalam masyarakat kita ketika modernitas masuk ke masyarakat lokal. Nah, apa sih dampaknya itu menurut dampak dari keterputusan sejarah itu, dan kemudian apakah ini yang di pulau lain bisa berdampak ke pulau-pulau lain seperti Mentawai misalnya atau pulau lain gitu? Terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak. Pertanyaannya penting. Boleh menjawab bahasa Inggris dalam bahasa Inggris? Tidak apa-apa? Atau campur? Campur. No, itu dampak, banyak dampak. Tapi biasanya kalau pikir tentang dampak, selalu pikir ada dampak dari apa? Kearifan kota atau kearifan development atau kearifan institusi. Dampak di tempatnya lokal kan, di komunitas lokal. Tapi semoga one day there is impact from knowledge from an island like Nine Island, which changes policy in the government. So, for example, if the government in Manado stops thinking of the area as a division of land and sea, and stops thinking of people who live on small islands as living on small islands, because Nain is not small. Nain travels across the region. If you look at the sea and the family connections and the not just in terms of business, but also the intellectual connections, Nain goes as far as Maluku or more, and on the other side goes as far as I don't know, the Indian Ocean. So these are not small communities. These are not small places. So the smallness of the place, if it's challenged and the government stops seeing a smallness, that can have an impact on dampak yang sebaliknya. In the policies that the government, but that's never going to happen. But anyway, being hopeful of that, and again, like she said, local wisdom is co-opted. Even when the government comes with a policy, we want to work with the community, so that they always mediate what is happening, because they use Bahasa Indonesia, so they always mediate. If we use Bahasa Sama, they can't mediate anymore, can they? So language is also sustained power relations. If we use Bahasa Sama, they cannot mediate anymore. So that's something that we need to think about. Mungkin tidak menjawab, betul. Tapi dampaknya harus sebaliknya, harus kembali lagi. Tidak cuma bisa dampaknya dari kota atau pemerintah ke kepulauan kecil. Supaya mereka ganti kehidupan mereka dan sikap mereka. Itu salah. Itu kenapa? Jadi harus both ways. The government has to change the way that they design policy and the way they approach places and communities, and also acknowledge that also they have inherited it. It's not that they created that either, but they have inherited these narratives and institutions. Does it make sense? Atau tidak? Mungkin tidak. Nanti bisa bertanya lagi ya, boleh? Terima kasih banyak semuanya. Terima kasih. Ada satu pertanyaan lagi atau mau nanti? Ya? Mau? Makan siang aja ya? Iya. Maaf ya.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Elena atas pemaparannya yang sangat menarik. Kemudian sesi selanjutnya yakni sesi istirahat dan makan siang. Bagi hadirin yang memiliki pantangan atau dietary requirements, silakan mengambil konsumsi di meja presensi. Bagi yang tidak, dapat mengambil di meja coffee break tadi. Kemudian acara akan dimulai kembali pada pukul 1. Terima kasih.